Welcome to the Global Roundtable. This series focuses on the future of economic competition. I'm Parag Khanna, joined by a distinguished panel including Dambisa Moyo, Daniel Altman, and Anand Giridharadas. Today's topic is the new Maritime Silk Road. Despite the financial crisis, we have emerging market regions trading ever more with each other and even becoming engines of global economic growth into the future. We have maps that show that the resource-rich Persian Gulf countries are increasingly selling their oil not to the west, but across the Indian Ocean to the east, hence this new Maritime Silk Road. What does it mean, though? Can it really be the core driver of the global economy moving forward?
Well, fundamentally, we shouldn't be surprised at that. I mean, these are the economies backed up by these large populations of people who are trying to improve their economic living standards. It's not just Middle East and China. I mean, the fact that China has about 7% arable land means that she's always going to be looking for places that have more arable land to finance or to provide foodstuffs. The fact that Africa is the largest place with the untilled arable land left on earth means there's a natural symbiosis, a natural relationship that should emerge there. These are depleting resources. So the question is how much of this can continue over the long term?
Look, there's no doubt that countries like China and even countries like Saudi Arabia need lots of resources to feed their people and feed their factories, but we're at risk of a new kind of colonialism developing here, which isn't at the end of a barrel of a gun, but rather at the end of a billion-dollar check. I think that it's going to cause instability. I think in the long term it creates more risks than it gets rid of for these countries. Even though they're doing trade, it's the leaders who are making the deals, not the people.
So you're saying comparative advantage is what is connoted by this term New Silk Road, yet at the same time it's actually very mercantile in nature?
I think there are some really coercive relationships that are developing, and you only have to look at China's influence over the foreign policy of some of the countries it does business with to see a new set of client states developing.
I'd put it in a slightly different context, which is I think, to Dambisa's point earlier, this is about the restoration of normalcy in a way. These are countries having relationships with each other that are not mediated by the West. And it's going to continue. And I think this is one of the questions where the West has to think about how can it still be relevant. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe still today, if a Korean company wanted to buy a Venezuelan company, it would probably still use New York investment bankers. We're probably moving into a world where they'll use Korean or Venezuelan investment bankers. And with shipping and with any other thing, is the West even going to be in the middle of all these transactions among countries that are outside the West?
In this 21st century Silk Road, actually, you have Latin America and Africa as participants in growing share, in fact, of trade and exports, more than in any other period of history. So in that sense, it's an unmitigated good thing, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a missed trick by developed countries. I mean, if you think about the last 50 years, Africa's proximity and historical context has absolutely been with Europe and the United States. But their approach in dealing with the economic challenges that Africa has faced in particular has been one of handing out aid, not developing economies, not building a long-term relationship around agriculture and so on. So they're going to pay for that now. It's not just Africa. The fact that Brazil and Chile now have China as their largest trading partner means the Monroe Doctrine is certainly something of the past.
But Daniel, how do we make the countries that are on the receiving end of this check that may be masking a gun, how do you make them equal participants?
It really has to come from inside. These countries, if they're more democratic and more meritocratic, will be able to have a better say in their economic futures. But that growth, which is creating the South-South trade, is really a salubrious thing for the West as well, because it's creating more economic power in these parts of the world that can be consumer markets for the United States and Europe in the future.
These marriages of convenience are really going to continue into the foreseeable future. You mentioned China has an arable land shortage, while Africa has a huge amount of agricultural productive potential, growing consumer markets which require energy in Asia, and of course energy supply in the Middle East, raw materials from Latin America going to the other markets. So, but where might this break down is one question that I think we need to ask.
Resource constraints. Absolutely. I mean, the fact that we've got 9 billion people planned for 2050 means that arable land, issues around water, issues around energy, issues around minerals are absolutely going to be front and center. And this is where, again, I think the West, led by the United States, really has an important role in keeping the innovation and cutting edge and fresh, because we will need to figure out a solution to provide for all this.
We have many Silk Roads in the future, but that doesn't mean that we are not all on the same planet and have to face resource constraints. This is really an intimate issue for the future of the global economy and global competition. Thanks for joining us. More on that and other topics at bigthink.com.